Helen was already inside the problem before she understood how deep it went. She was 34 years old, living in a one-bedroom apartment off Maitama's quieter street. And by every measure the world used to judge a woman, she had come up short. She was not the kind of woman people noticed when she walked into a room. She was not the kind of woman men turned to look at twice. She was not the kind of woman her family pointed to with pride at gatherings. She was simply Helen, present, working, trying. And somehow that had never been enough for anyone. She had spent 3 years at Pinnacle Consulting, giving everything she had. Early mornings, late nights, reports that her superiors presented as their own. Ideas that disappeared into meetings and came back wearing someone else's name. She had watched younger colleagues get promoted. She had watched men with half her competence get called into the director's office for praise. She had told herself to be patient. She had told herself that her time was coming. And then Mr. Chukwu had looked her in the eye and told her that some people were built for leadership and some people were built for support, and she should know where she belonged. She sat in that stairwell for 11 minutes. Then she stood up, straightened her dress, and walked back into the office to finish the rest of her shift. Because that was what Helen did. She absorbed the blow and she kept moving. But something had shifted. Something quiet and permanent. Her personal life offered no relief. Her mother called every Sunday, not to ask how she was doing, but to remind her that her younger sister Choma had just gotten engaged. And that time was not waiting for anybody. Her aunties at every family gathering spoke about her in the third person, even when she was standing right there. She heard words like difficult and too serious, and the problem with Helen is that she does not try. The men her family introduced her to took one look and found reasons to look away. One had told her directly, with a smile, that he needed someone with more energy. Another had stopped calling after their second outing without explanation. A third had told a mutual friend that Helen was fine, but not the kind of woman you build a life with. Her friends, the ones she had kept since university, had slowly drifted into their own lives. Marriages, babies, new social circles. Helen found herself calling people who took 3 days to reply. She found herself at birthday dinners where the conversation moved around her like water around a stone. She was not disliked. She was simply not seen. She stopped going to the dinners. She stopped making the calls. By the time October arrived, Helen had reduced her entire life to 3 things: work, her apartment, and the silence she had learned to sit inside without falling apart. She was not depressed in the way people describe depression. She was something quieter and more dangerous. She was a woman who had begun to believe what the world was telling her about herself. It was a Tuesday night when everything changed. She could not sleep. She had been lying in the dark for 2 hours, her phone face up on the pillow beside her, the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. She picked up her phone with no intention, the way a person reaches for something when they have run out of things to reach for. She scrolled without focus, and then a video stopped her. A woman was speaking directly into a camera. No studio, no production, just a woman, a ring light, and words that felt like they had been aimed specifically at Helen's chest. The world will keep telling you who you are until you decide to tell it yourself. Your silence is not your problem. Your believing them is. Her name was Dr. Vivian Okafor. She was a transformation coach based in Lagos who had built an entire platform around women who had been written off by the people closest to them. Helen watched the video 3 times. Then she watched another. Then another. At 2 a.m., she was still watching. At 3 a.m., she sent a message through the platform's contact page, a long, unguarded message that she almost deleted 4 times before she finally pressed send. Dr. Vivian replied the next morning. That reply was the first crack of light in a room that had been dark for a very long time. What followed was not a miracle. Helen was clear about that later when she told her story. It was not a sudden transformation or a magic formula. It was work. The slow, uncomfortable, daily kind of work that nobody sees and nobody applauds. Dr. Vivian did not tell her she was beautiful and brilliant and the world was wrong. She asked Helen harder questions. She asked her what she actually wanted. She asked her what she had been settling for and why. She pushed her to identify the specific ways she had been making herself smaller to fit into spaces that were never built for her. Helen began to rebuild herself from the inside out. She started with her appearance, not because her appearance had been the problem, but because she had been neglecting herself in ways that reflected how little she thought she was worth. She began to take care of her skin, her hair, her body, not for anyone else, but as a daily act of choosing herself. She joined a gym in Wuse and went at 5:30 every morning before the city woke up. She read the books Dr. Vivian assigned. She journaled every night. She had weekly sessions over video call that left her shaking and clearer at the same time. Then she started building. Dr. Vivian asked her what she was actually good at, and Helen, who had never been asked that question seriously, took 2 weeks to answer it honestly. What she came back with surprised even herself. She was exceptional at organizing chaos. She was the person who had always made difficult things run smoothly. She had spent 3 years making her superiors look competent. Her business grew faster than she had planned for. By the end of her first full year operating independently, she had 12 corporate clients in Abuja, a waiting list, and a revenue that tripled what Pinnacle had ever paid her. She moved out of the 1-bedroom apartment in Maitama into a 2-floor space that was both her home and her office. She hired 2 assistants. She began speaking at small events, women's forums, startup gatherings, and discovered that when she spoke, people leaned forward to listen. She had become someone impossible to overlook. She had not done it loudly. She had not announced herself or performed her progress for people who had doubted her. She had worked, and the results had announced themselves. It was a journalist named Adaize Nwosu who brought everything to the surface. Adaize was writing a feature for a major national publication on women in Abuja who had built businesses from nothing after being professionally sidelined. A mutual contact put her in touch with Helen. They met at Helen's office, the same Maitama neighborhood where she had once been invisible. And what began as a 1-hour interview became 3 hours, and a story that Adaize knew immediately was bigger than the feature she had been assigned to write. Helen told everything. She named Pinnacle Consulting. She recounted word for word what Mr. Chukwu had said to her in that office. She spoke about her family, not with bitterness, but with precision, naming the specific things that had been said and done, and the weight they had carried. She spoke about the men who had dismissed her, and the friends who had drifted, and the years of silence she had absorbed while the world decided she was ordinary. She spoke about Dr. Vivian and the 2 a.m. video and the message she had almost deleted. She spoke about what it cost to choose yourself when no one else would. Adeze published the piece on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, it had been shared over 40,000 times. By Friday, it was trending. By Saturday, it had been picked up by 3 major Nigerian media outlets and 2 international platforms covering African women in business. The exposure was total. Mr. Chukwu's name was in the article. Pinnacle Consulting's name was in the article. The Human Resources Department released a carefully worded statement that satisfied nobody and only confirmed what Helen had described. Former colleagues began coming forward publicly to corroborate what she had said. Stories of the same patterns, the same dismissals, the same invisible
ceiling that had pressed down on women in that office for years. A full investigation was announced within the week. Mr. Chukwu was placed on administrative leave before the following Monday. Her mother called 3 times on the Friday the article went viral. Helen let the calls go to voicemail. When she finally called back on Sunday evening, her mother's voice had a quality Helen had never heard in it before. Something careful and uncertain. The voice of a woman trying to find her footing in a conversation she no longer controlled. The aunties who had spoken about her in the third person at family gatherings were now sharing her article on their own pages with captions full of pride that Helen read with the calm, clear eyes of a woman who remembered everything. The men who had dismissed her were not difficult to identify. Her story had enough specific detail that people who knew them knew immediately. One reached out through a mutual contact to offer congratulations. She did not respond. Another posted publicly about being inspired by her journey. A post that collected comments from people who had heard Helen's account and were not as forgiving as he had hoped. He deleted it by the next morning. The friends who had drifted watched from their own quiet distances. Some sent messages. Helen replied to the ones that felt genuine and left the rest unread. She was not angry. She was done. The conference invitation came 6 weeks after the article. The Abuja Women in Leadership Summit, one of the largest of its kind in the region, wanted Helen as their closing keynote speaker. She stood on that stage in a room of 800 women and she spoke for 40 minutes without notes. She spoke about the stairwell. She spoke about the Tuesday night and the video and the 2 a.m. message. She spoke about what it means to work on yourself when the whole world has already decided who you are. When she finished, the room was on its feet. She looked out at 800 standing women and she felt something settle inside her. Not triumph exactly, not revenge, but something more complete than either of those things. She felt the weight of every year she had spent being overlooked lift cleanly from her shoulders and dissolve into the air of that auditorium. She had not just risen. She had made it impossible for anyone who had ever dismissed her to pretend they had not. The whole country had heard exactly what they did. And Helen, quiet, plain, not enough Helen, was the one still standing. The people who called her ordinary are now calling her an inspiration. But here is the question. If she had never transformed, would any of them have changed? Or do people only respect you when you can no longer be ignored? Drop your honest answer in the comments. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs it today. And drop a comment. We want to hear from you. God bless you.